Welcome to Conversations. I'm Muqtadar Khan, your host, and today I'm going to talk to you about the Trump administration's national security strategy. The American administration is often required by the Congress, or there's actually a law that says that the administration should, at least in its first 3 months, share with us what their vision of their foreign policy is, share their basically national security strategy. And so the Trump administration has just shared its national security strategy for 2025. It comes about 10 months after, or more than 10 months after he has become president, but nevertheless, it gives us some insight into what the Trump administration is trying to do. To be very clear, that a lot of what is in the national security strategy has already become apparent from the choices that President Trump has made. We can say very clearly that we have observed that geoeconomics or mercantilism is more important than geopolitics. He would rather make a trade deal than go to war. These things are very, very clear. But nevertheless, let me tell you that it is a very interesting revelation of how this administration thinks. And also it highlights the blind spots in this administration's thinking. And I will try to do both in this brief discussion. Today happens to be the last day of classes at the University of Delaware. So it's also going to be a very busy day. So I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. There are basically four parts to this national security strategy. You can see from the table of contents, they have deliberately tried to keep it less academic and less professional, in keeping with this administration's anti-intellectual posture. I guess they think that this is a commonsensical foreign policy. So basically, the first part is what is American strategy, and then they talk about so basically there are four parts to the national security strategy. In the first part, they critique America's grand strategy so far. They don't use the word grand strategy, but basically they are targeting past precedents and saying how they have misled America and what their goals were. The second part of their strategy is what does America want. They don't use the word, I mean, they do use the word core national interests, but the title is what do we want overall. Then they talk about America's capacity and capabilities, and then finally the strategy. So the way they define strategy is matching capacity with goals or ends and means. So strategy to them is something that links their ends and their means. You know, you could actually have a strategy, and even if you don't have the means, then you can go out there and work hard to acquire those means to pursue the goals that you set for yourself, the national purpose that you choose to define yourself. But nevertheless, I must say that their diagnosis of the past foreign policy, I sort of agree with it. This is what they said, that the American governments so far, or American presidents so far, have tried to pursue two goals. They have essentially built an empire overseas by trying to promote the global liberal order. And at home, they have built a welfare state. So basically, they are saying that this liberal welfare state at home and liberal order outside is essentially something that America cannot afford and should not pursue. And one example of that is America's what they call as misguided faith in globalism, which essentially made China a major competitor and undermined America's economy and undermined America's, basically weakened America at home because of the rise of China and other players. So basically they are opposed to the American grand strategy of building and sustaining the liberal international order overseas. And they are also a bit miffed by the welfare state that has emerged at home. I recently published a short article in which I more or less, I must confess, I agree with their foreign policy assessment, not their domestic policy I argue as to how America has overextended itself overseas, and therefore America's empire is crushing the American dream. I'm not opposed to the welfareism that we practice at home. In fact, I would like the American government to do less for billionaires and more for ordinary Americans rather than cutting taxes to make the rich richer. I would rather the American government invested in universities, in education, in healthcare of its own citizens. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about today. So the first argument was that America is misguided, and so the Trump administration is going to return to what they simply call as America first. But this is what they do in their second part. In their second part, they define what they really want. Some of the stuff is textbook stuff, like anything that in American Foreign Policy 101, you would ask what are American national interests, and of course, protecting American assets, protecting the American citizens, protecting borders, etc. But then they add a couple of interesting things. Uh, and one thing is that they say it is in the interest, as part of the interest that they need to protect, is spiritual and cultural health of the nation. Now, this is such a nebulous term. I've never heard President Trump or anybody in his administration talking about spiritual health and cultural health, spiritual well-being and cultural health. But this is now a national interest of the US government. It sounds like a religious state talking about spirituality. It is like Hindu nationalism talking about protecting the Hindu spirit, or the Islamic State talking about protecting the Sharia. So it seems like that. So this is their way of saying we want to keep America a white ethno national Christian state, basically. So it is couched in these vague words, spiritual and cultural health. I mean, given the fact that this particular administration has spent so much time safeguarding, uh, or protecting Epstein files, uh, that is something fascinating to me, that a whole culture of pedophilia and corruption and blackmail and lies have been defended by this administration, and the saga continues. And they talk about spiritual and cultural health. Is the spiritual and cultural health of the United States going to be uh, uh, safeguarded by safeguarding the files of Epstein and not letting us know what was really happening? Anyway, this is the things that they do want to protect. And then they talk about America's capabilities and America's capacity and the strengths. So they brag about America's armies. America is the most powerful military in the world. America is the biggest economy, which is a fact. At $30 trillion, we are 1.5 times bigger than China, our next biggest economy in the world. It talks about America's uh, technological and scientific advantage over the rest of the world. So their assessment of American power and capacity is more or less on the dot. I mean, this is something that even any undergraduate student should be able to enumerate. However, they do talk about a couple of things which I think are very problematic. One, they talk about American soft power, and they say that America has the greatest soft power. But there seems to be no self reflection or realization that some of the policies that they are pursuing in the name of combating illegal migration to the United States uh, is certainly not enhancing America's soft power, but it's also destroying. The manner in which we have treated international students, the cruelty with which we have deported people. So there seems to be a deliberate attempt to be cruel. And the aggressiveness with which we have targeted international students and migrants. For example, look at the president, the way he talked about the Somalis as garbage. I mean, is this a reflection of spiritual and cultural health of America? Is this something that is going to enhance America's soft power in the world? If the American president talks about many who are actually born in America and are citizens, calling them garbage. So there seems to be no self-awareness that soft power comes when people overseas look at America and admire America, not for out of fear of its power, but admire it because of the example that it sets on moral issues. So America's morality, America's openness, America's democracy, America's pursuit of human rights, those are the things that give America soft power. Yes, innovation, cultural innovation, yes, Hollywood, all of these also contribute to America's soft power. But the key element of American soft power comes from America's democracy. And right now, even a large number of Americans feel that the current administration is doing more to undermine America's democracy than strengthen it. So, to me, when they talk about America's soft power as its strength, the lack of awareness that the threat that they pose to America's soft power is not acknowledged at all. They also talk about essentially of America's capacity and power in generating new technologies and innovation. That is true. There is no doubt about it. In this entire century, the previous century, the 20th century, and the 21st century, whether it is the internet, whether it is space travel, whether it's all kinds of scientific developments, America has been ahead of the rest of the world without doubts. America's contribution to the pursuit of knowledge, the pursuit of technology, even in the 21st century, with artificial intelligence, we are ahead of the rest of the world. So there is no doubt that America is way ahead. China is catching up, but is far behind, and China's achievements do not really stack up against America's achievements of the 20th and the 21st century when it comes to science and technology. However, this particular administration, like soft power, is also undermining those very things by punishing America's top universities on political grounds, cutting scientific grants, the way it has canceled grants to Harvard University, to Columbia University, even Stanford, is unbelievable. Uh, so, uh, so while I agree that America's power comes from its scientific and technological achievements, this administration is neither investing in new research and new technology. I have not yet seen any grants being announced, any major initiatives that are being taken to promote scientific development. In fact, targeting international students who have been, in many ways, a core element of America's scientific and technological achievements, attacking foreign students, attacking our main universities. I don't think that the administration is serious about that. So what is the administration serious about? I think there are two or three things that is very clear that they are very serious about. One thing is immigration. And there is a sentence in the national security strategy which says mass migration is over. Then they talk about Europe, and the manner in which this administration has talked about Europe clearly shows that identity, white nationalism, Christian, Judeo-Christian identity, these things are the number one concern of this administration. It is trying to elevate mass migration to the core of national security interest. And that is obvious. The desire to preserve spiritual and cultural health is essentially identity. So they are motivated more by, shall we say, cultural identity than by any economic or political ideology. Uh, but then the strategy that they articulate and the things that they want to pursue can best be described from an international relations theory point of view as a mixture of offshore balancing with buck passing. So it's a mixture of offshore balancing with buck passing, and I'll explain to you now what I really mean. They talk about flexible realism. Some commentators have said that the administration is pursuing what it calls as principled realism. So they are realists, but also in a principled fashion. I'm not very sure whether there are any principles that are guiding this foreign policy other than to protect the national identity, a particular kind of American identity that they want to freeze in time, and essentially an identity that is shaped by xenophobia. Uh, but let us see what it essentially does. It's very clear, it's very simple offshore balancing. They divide the world into essentially four parts: the Western Hemisphere, Europe, Middle East, and East Asia. They're not very concerned about South Asia or Africa or Central Asia in this national security strategy. Number one, they are, I mean, it looks as if this part must have been written by Professor John Mearsheimer. They want to dominate the Western Hemisphere. It's very clear. So they do not want to see any competition. They also want to have friendly states in the Western Hemisphere who will allow the United States to go in and conduct operations against narco-terrorists, for example, without resistance. So they are looking at complete domination of Western Hemisphere. This has always been a bipartisan approach of all American foreign policy makers since the Monroe Doctrine. In fact, they invoke the term Monroe Doctrine with a caveat from Donald Trump, and the caveat is that basically he seems to want to have even more, not just exclude foreign participation in the Western Hemisphere, but also have unfettered freedom to exercise interventionism in the Western Hemisphere. So that's as far as the West is concerned. And then there are comments about it's in Asia that you can see there's a lot of buck passing that is concerned. So they recognize the importance of Indo-Pacific, but they also say that while we support an open Indo-Pacific region, they also recognize that the growth of China has been detrimental to America, and so they want to push mercantilism. So if you want to push mercantilism, then how can you be pushing an open Indo-Pacific at the same time when you're imposing tariffs and you're practicing protectionism? So there is a contradiction, and they seem to be aware that there is a contradiction. So basically, they're saying that while we appreciate the significance of East Asia, it's going to have about 50% of the global GDP very soon. This is an important part, so we want to protect our economy, but we also want the Indo-Pacific to be peaceful and open. And what is more important is we want the powers that are there in the region to step up and do more. And in this context, they specifically talk. In fact, the only context in which they talk about India is encouraging India to do more to keep the Indo-Pacific open. And so they said we need to pursue our relations with India in that context, in the context of Quad, but to make sure that India does a lot more. Or they use words like burden sharing and burden shifting, but I think they are buck passing. They want others to keep the Indo-Pacific open because the United States now is comfortable with the idea of protectionism. So this idea of a free trade and free market approach is not something that the Trump administration is going to spend energy and resources to maintain. As far as Europe is concerned, this is where the cultural side of the Trump administration becomes very clear. With regards to Europe, they are very clear that they feel that Europe faces an existential civilizational threat. They even talk about some states becoming non-European in a few decades. So there's a clearly racist undertones to this policy. What do they mean by non-European? Which means that the new immigrants who are coming in or have just come in is talking about the mayor of London and I guess hinting at the mayor of New York. So these is Sadiq Khan, who was born in England, not European? So there's lack of clarity, but you can hear the dog whistling. It's very clear that they are trying to very clearly send signals to Europe saying that, look, we appreciate you, we admire you because we have a shared civilizational culture and ethos. But if you become non-European and because of mass migration, then we really don't care about you anymore. That's the message. And they are also very happy that Europe is spending more and more resources in building the European defense infrastructure. Here again, it is essentially an element of buck passing, where they would like Europeans to be responsible, which is what every American should. Even I feel that we have spent a lot of resources and energy in trying to defend a very prosperous and wealthy Europe. Those same resources could have been invested in American infrastructure. I just came back from a visit from China, and I was stunned at the physical infrastructure that China has. I was in my mind thinking before I went to China is when will India catch up with China? But after looking at China, I mean, I went to Shenzhen and Beijing. My question to my mind is, will the US ever catch up with China? They're clearly from a physical infrastructure, from if you look at their public transport, their speed trains, their airports, their environmentally friendly cars, etc. They are way ahead of the United States, no doubt about it. While we are busy fighting for Taiwan, for Ukraine, billions of dollars for Israel, enormous number of wars we have fought for Israel, including Iraq and other places, and spent literally trillions of dollars have gone down the drain fighting for other countries, which could have been invested at home. We could have had more robust universities, better roads, better railways, etc. That's, I mean, obviously, at some point, the American ordinary citizens who have been fooled by their leaders into a foreign policy that cares more about foreign countries than domestic constituents will someday, the American citizens, even the so-called MAGA crowd, they haven't realized that the Trump administration's Middle East policy is all Israel first. Everything that they have done in the last 11 months is to advance Israel. The biggest initiative is pushing the Abrahamic Accords. The Abrahamic Accords are irrelevant to the US. They are just to make Israel more comfortable and safer in the Middle East. All these attacks on Iran and initiatives in Syria, everything that Donald Trump has done in the Middle East is about Israel first. And when we look at the Middle East section, they are basically saying that, yes, we support Israel as an important ally, but it doesn't mean that we are going to be dominant. The era of American foreign policy being dominated by the Middle East is over. That's exactly what they say in there. But that is not manifest in the manner in which they have conducted the foreign policy. The Trump administration's Middle East intervention has been essentially going down Netanyahu's wish list. And that's what the Trump administration, look at the people Trump has appointed. It looks as if it's a wish list from Netanyahu. So it is very clear that American foreign policy, at least in the Middle East, is completely dominated by Israeli interest with no hint of any American interest. In fact, I'm willing to bet that some of the Americans who have been in power, if asked to define American interests independent of Israel, they will be unable to do so. So while on paper they talk about offshore balancing, which means they will not allow anybody to become hegemonically dominant, they're very clear in the Middle East that they do not want to see another hegemon emerging. Well, Israel is a hegemon in the Middle East. And unless you don't see it as a foreign country, you're okay with a hegemonic rise of Israel in the Middle East. Anyway, so in the Middle East, in Europe, and in East Asia, they do not wish to see the emergence of any major power that will dominate there to the exclusion of the West or the US. And so the US, in partnership, if necessary, will work with regional powers to prevent the emergence. So it's essentially offshore balancing with a lot of buck passing. Clearly, they don't see what they are writing and what they are doing are not in touch. Their biggest issues are immigration, cultural identity, and of course, America's trade deficit. They do see the trade deficit as something very, very critical. They feel that a trade deficit is something that undermines American power, and therefore they want to eliminate the very global order that essentially generates America's trade deficits. So this is, I think, my summary of the national security strategy. To be fair, I don't think that Donald Trump has even read this national security strategy. I don't know who has written this. Perhaps there is some input from Marco Rubio, who is now both the Secretary of State as well as the National Security advisor. So whether it's coming from the NSC or the State Department, there were rumors that a lot of this is probably being written in the Department of Defense. But there are a couple of shifts, definitely. The Indo-Pacific has become less important. India has become less important. And clearly, Europe is a source of concern. But what concerns America about Europe is something that the Europeans are not going to like it. The signal is very clear. If you don't remain culturally pure, then we will abandon you. Anyway, thank you for watching Conversations. If you have not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with your socio-political network. I also want to share another article I just published in The Diplomat. This is about the Modi-Putin summit that just took place. My argument is there's a lot of pomp and show, but not anything significant. The general chatter in India is as if the global balance of power has been transformed and altered. Let me remind Indian viewers that the West, which is Europe and the US together, are $50 trillion. So the West and the US today are combined are about 45% of the global economy, and Russia is just $2 trillion, which is 2% to the European 45%. So India is shifting its alliance from a 45 a percentage of the global economy to 2% of the global economy is not a major shift that is advantageous to India. And India and Russia together are $6 trillion. They are less than 5% of the global economy. So for those people who argue that the balance of power has shifted in the world because Putin went to India, I think they need to wake up and smell the coffee. So thank you for watching Conversations. I look forward to seeing you. For those of you who are in India, I will be doing another take on the Trump national security strategy, keeping India's interests and concerns in mind. And I will probably do that in the Hindi language. Take care. Bye.